The president of my HOA did more than just slap me with a $5,000 fine for my supposedly unsightly garden. She clandestinely destroyed my dying wife's cherished roses, attempted to seize my $750,000 inheritance, and subsequently tried to commit arson to incinerate my wife's final resting place. However, when federal archaeologists proclaimed that very garden a historical landmark valued at $500,000, I orchestrated the spectacular collapse of her whole illicit enterprise in the most dramatic fashion imaginable. Imagine this. My wife, Sarah, succumbing to cancer, clutching my quivering hands in that disinfected medical room. The scent of antiseptic failed to conceal her terror as she murmured her last request. Restore grandmother's garden. Marcus, promise me my ashes. I want them there, mingled with the soil where love has flourished for generations. Dead people have no use for gardens, Marcus? Delilah Thornfield hissed 8 months down the line, her polished fingernails tapping on the frame of my door. It's time to accept reality and sell. What she was unaware of was that Sarah's cremated ashes were already enriching the soil of those cherished roses, and I was on the verge of transforming her avarice into a matter for federal authorities. How would you react if someone attempted to desecrate the grave of your spouse for financial gain? Comment below, what is the limit when it comes to safeguarding true love? My name is Marcus Hartwell, and at the age of 52, I believed I knew the meaning of loss. 8 months prior, cancer had taken my wife, Sarah, from my life, leaving me with a vacant home filled with the echoes of her laughter and a promise I felt uncertain I could fulfill. But Sarah was more than my soulmate. She was an ingenious woman who could perceive the truth behind people's masks long before I ever could. As her strength waned, Sarah dedicated hours to investigating our property's lineage, unearthing a detail that would alter the course of events. My grandmother, Rosalind, had not merely bequeathed me a house. She had left behind a meticulously designed legal safeguard worth $750,000. Marcus? Sarah murmured one afternoon, her fingers unsteady as she presented me with yellowed legal papers. The aroma of her vanilla perfume was diminishing, supplanted by the clinical odor of medical devices. Your grandmother was more astute than we realized. This garden isn't simply for aesthetics. There is a trust fund, $750,000, accessible only if the garden is preserved as a living memorial. She suspected someone would try to take this place, that someone was Delilah Thornfield, our HOA president and the very woman who had offered a smile at Sarah's funeral while secretly scheming to annihilate everything we held dear. What I didn't realize at the time was that Delilah had been scheming for 8 years. Ever since Sarah inherited my grandmother's house in a will dispute that left Delilah feeling resentful and deprived. You see, both women had been my grandmother's neighbors, but Sarah had genuinely looked after the elderly woman in her final years, whereas Delilah only saw monetary value. When my grandmother designated Sarah as her heir, Delilah's amiable facade fractured, exposing the calculating real estate opportunist hidden within. Behind her flawlessly composed smile, Delilah managed a covert empire. Her LLC, concealed beneath numerous layers of legal documents, had methodically singled out our street's original property owners. Eleanor Vance, the kind widow living next door, recounted how Delilah had assisted her with her relocation to an assisted living facility following a sudden surge in citations. Frank Morrison, the veteran with PTSD who found solace in his garden, sold his property after experiencing unexplained utility disconnections and tax reassessments. The strategy was ingenious in its cruelty. Pinpoint vulnerable homeowners, fabricate infractions, apply financial duress, and then intervene with below-market rescue bids through front companies. Delilah was more than our HOA president. She was managing a complex property theft scheme with a projected value of over $12 million in luxury townhouse development. But Sarah's passing had provided Delilah with her prime opportunity. The day following the funeral, while I was still reeling from grief, she showed up at my door with contrived tears and a business deal. Marcus, dear, she had purred, her manicured hand on my arm, while her emotionless eyes assessed property values. Sarah wouldn't want you burdened with this large old house. Perhaps it's time to make a fresh start elsewhere. I know some investors who would offer cash to help you move forward. What she failed to disclose was that she was the investor, concealed behind legal paperwork and shell corporations. The psychological assault started subtly. Anonymous calls to Adult Protective Services alleged I was experiencing a mental breakdown. There were hushed conversations with neighbors about my unhealthy fixation on a deceased woman. Tactical insinuations were made that grief was rendering me unstable, a danger, and incapable of maintaining the property or making logical choices. Then the garden sabotage commenced. Sarah's beloved heritage roses, irreplaceable specimens she had diligently researched and chosen for the memorial, suddenly wilted overnight. The accidental herbicide overspray occurred during a community beautification project that Delilah had personally supervised. Standing in that contaminated garden, touching the browned edges of petals that had blossomed for Sarah only weeks earlier, I felt something shatter within me. This was more than mere vandalism. It was the desecration of sacred ground where my wife's ashes were blended with soil that had fostered love for generations. The $5,000 fine was perfectly timed. 30 days to rectify the violations or be subject to legal proceedings, with the deadline set to fall precisely on the anniversary of Sarah's death. Delilah's psychological torment was surgically precise, but as I knelt in that ruined garden, inhaling the persistent scent of Sarah's memorial lavender and hearing only silence where her wind chimes once played, I made a resolve that would alter everything. Sarah had bequeathed me more than a garden and a promise. She had left me the means to retaliate. I just hadn't yet realized that I was about to expose a criminal conspiracy that would capture national attention. The desecration of Sarah's memorial commenced 3 weeks after her roses perished. I was on my knees next to her preferred river rock, a smooth piece of granite she had selected because it evoked memories of our honeymoon in Maine. When Delilah's shadow cast itself over the sacred ground where my wife's ashes fed new life. That memorial stone is in violation of our no religious displays policy, Marcus, she declared, her voice as biting as a winter gale. The morning dew made Sarah's rock gleam like teardrops, and I could detect the subtle lavender fragrance that lingered in this consecrated space. And those wind chimes, a noise ordinance violation. You have 24 hours to take them down or incur further fines. My hands tightened reflexively, feeling the cool surface of Sarah's memorial stone under my palm. This is not religious, it is my wife's grave. Delilah's laugh was like the sound of shattering glass. Your wife is no longer here? Marcus, cremated remains are not permitted in residential gardens. That's a health code infraction. It's time to let her go and move on. Sarah wouldn't want you clinging to the past this way. That night, sleep eluded me. Sarah's wind chimes sang their soft melody. Outside my bedroom window, a sound that had been my comfort through 8 months of sorrow. By the next morning, they had vanished, cut down with deliberate care, leaving behind sharp metal edges that nicked my skin when I touched them. But Delilah had made a critical error. Her methodical cruelty had stirred something within me that grief had rendered inactive. My analytical mind, Sarah used to say I was like a detective when a subject caught my interest, pursuing clues until the truth came to light. I began with Eleanor Vance, who resided 3 houses away in what was once her family's century-old home, over chamomile tea that smelled of Sarah's nightly ritual. Eleanor described the pattern I had been too distraught to notice. It began with unannounced inspections, Eleanor murmured, her aged hands trembling as she poured the tea. Delilah found violations I wasn't even aware of: window box height regulations, mailbox placement rules, sidewalk crack limits. The fines just kept accumulating: $50, then $200, then $500. When I was unable to pay, she proposed to help me move to assisted living. The acrid taste of understanding filled my mouth. Who purchased your house? Some investment firm, Delilah suggested them, said they were neighborhood-friendly. They bought it for 60% of its market value. Eleanor's voice faltered. I believed she was assisting me. That evening, I delved into property records until my eyes ached from the screen's light. The pattern became clear, like a malady spreading down our street. Vulnerable homeowners, mounting citations, and sales at below-market prices to the same network of LLCs. Delilah wasn't merely corrupt. She was operating a complex scheme of elder abuse. But her psychological assault against me was only just starting. Anonymous complaints inundated government agencies like poison ivy in a clear stream. The IRS was alerted by concerned citizens about my inheritance, prompting audits of the trust fund. Credit reporting bureaus received fraudulent debt reports. The mortgage company was sent warnings about declining property values that could impact my loan eligibility. Every day brought a new form of harassment presented as bureaucratic diligence. Utility companies were sent neighbor complaints about unpaid bills, leading to threats of service disconnection. The health department got anonymous tips about unsanitary burial methods involving Sarah's cremated remains, compelling invasive inspections of our sacred memorial. The most devastating blow was finding Sarah's hidden research notes, tucked away behind my grandmother's antique jewelry box. Her precise handwriting filled pages of legal papers, chronicling Delilah's suspicious actions throughout Sarah's illness. She had been aware. Somehow, even while battling cancer, Sarah had identified the predator that was circling our home. Marcus, her final entry stated, "If you are reading this, something has befallen me and Delilah is making her move." The garden. Preservation clause is not just a whim of grandmother's, it's a legal shield. The trust fund can support a legal defense, but only if you maintain the memorial. I've recorded her remarks about helping you move on. Don't let her take what 3 generations have built with love. Knowledge nugget. Always investigate who stands to gain from your compliance with their demands. Predators frequently present theft as assistance. Sarah's words struck me like ice water on a fresh burn. My brilliant wife had been carrying out her own inquiry while I was preoccupied with her medical needs, constructing a case against the woman who had smiled at her funeral. That night, Delilah escalated her actions to blatant vandalism. I awoke to an unnerving quiet, not the tranquil calm of early morning, but the dreadful void left by Sarah's memorial wind chimes. Dashing outside in my pajamas, my bare feet damp with dew, I discovered the copper tubes strewn across the garden like fractured bones. Sarah's carefully placed river rock memorial had been shifted for compliance. No longer designating the spot where her ashes nurtured the soil, standing in that defiled space, inhaling the scent of overturned earth and crushed lavender, I felt a profound change within me. Grief hardened into a steely resolve. Sarah had provided me with the means to retaliate, and Delilah had just waged war on hallowed ground. The predator had roused a prey that would not flee. The police officer's radio emitted static in the pre-dawn gloom as he stood in my memorial garden, his flashlight beam piercing the morning mist that held the lingering scent of Sarah's lavender. Officer Martinez seemed uneasy, adjusting his stance as he observed me kneeling by the displaced memorial stone. "Sir, we got a call from a concerned citizen about erratic behavior," he stated softly. "Someone reported you were speaking to, someone who isn't present." My throat constricted with shame. This was Delilah's masterpiece, transforming my rituals of grief into proof of mental fragility. Every morning for 8 months, I had read to Sarah from her cherished poetry book, sharing updates and recollections with the woman whose ashes were enriching the soil beneath me. I read to my late wife's memorial. I clarified, my voice unwavering despite the fury searing in my chest. Her cremated ashes are part of this soil. It's a form of therapeutic grief processing, not a mental health issue. Officer Martinez gave a sympathetic nod and departed without any further action. But the harm had been inflicted. By midday, Delilah's network had turned the wellness check into a weapon for a much more severe assault. The legal documents came by certified mail. Their official seals conveying a menacing authority. Delilah's lawyer, who conveniently was also her golf partner, had submitted a petition challenging my mental competence as the trustee of my grandmother's $750,000 estate. The motion argued that my garden obsession and conversations with the deceased demonstrated my incapacity to make sound financial judgments. The legal approach was devilishly clever. Compel a court-mandated sale to protect me from my own grief, with the profits managed by a qualified trustee who would surely advise selling the property for my therapeutic well-being. But Sarah's foresight had taught me to document everything. I had been recording our exchanges since the roses were poisoned, creating a timeline of harassment that presented a starkly different narrative. My phone held hours of Delilah's calculated cruelty, each conversation exposing her true intentions beneath a veneer of feigned concern. Knowledge nugget. Grief is not a mental illness. Proactively document your competence with medical professionals who are familiar with bereavement processes. I reached out to Sarah's oncology team at once. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who had supported us through Sarah's final months, supplied a written declaration regarding healthy grieving practices and memorial rituals. Her letter to the court served as a medical defense, slicing through Delilah's psychological manipulation. Meanwhile, Delilah organized a neighborhood intervention meeting, to which I was not invited. Eleanor, still plagued by guilt over her own property loss, attended in secret and relayed the details. Delilah had persuaded newer residents that I was dangerous to approach and unstable since losing his wife. She portrayed you as a threat, Eleanor murmured, her voice trembling as we sat in her small assisted living unit, which smelled of institutional cleaner instead of freshly baked bread. She said your property values were impacting everyone. That action needed to be taken before you harmed yourself or others. The social isolation strategy was executed with surgical precision. Grocery delivery services started to decline deliveries to my door. Mail carriers noted concerning behavior to their superiors. Even the neighbor's teenage son, who had previously assisted with yard work, ceased his visits after his parents heard Delilah's admonitions. Then came the most devastating escalation, the threatened removal of Sarah's memorial oak tree. A hired crew showed up, asserting an emergency tree removal. For safety reasons. With chainsaws revving like mechanical vultures over the century-old oak that cast its shade on Sarah's resting place. The felling of this massive tree would have destroyed the garden's microclimate, killing the rare heritage plants Sarah had researched and selected for our memorial. More than just vandalism. It was a calculated obliteration of the ecosystem where her ashes had brought new life from death. I positioned myself between the chainsaws and Sarah's tree, my body shaking with a protective rage as the smell of diesel mixed with the sweet fragrance of morning glory vines Sarah had planted to reach for the sun. This tree is in perfect health and presents no danger. You have no legal right to be here. The crew foreman, visibly uncomfortable with the task, conceded they had been contracted by concerned neighbors, but possessed no official permits. They departed. But I was aware this was merely a preliminary step for a more sophisticated assault. That evening brought an unexpected supporter, Helen Martinez, the city's elderly archivist, called, her voice alive with excitement, crackling like dry autumn leaves. Marcus, I've been looking into your property's history after hearing about the conflicts. You must see what I've discovered. There's documentation from the 1920s indicating your grandmother's garden holds historical importance far beyond what we thought. Her words struck me like a flash of lightning that illuminates a dark terrain. What kind of importance? Your grandmother, Rosalind, wasn't merely a gardener. She was the town's first female botanist. That garden houses original specimens from the town founder's 1887 estate. Some of those plants could be genetically distinct, invaluable connections to our agricultural past. As Helen's words registered, I understood that Sarah had guided me to something more significant than personal retribution. My brilliant wife's feeling about the garden's value went beyond just protecting an inheritance. She had, in some way, perceived that this sacred ground contained secrets that could shield us from any legal onslaught. The predator was about to learn she had targeted prey that was protected by history itself. The adverse possession claim was delivered on a Tuesday morning that began with the fragrance of Sarah's memorial roses blooming more vibrantly than ever. As if her spirit were mustering strength for the upcoming fight, Delilah's newest legal assault was a masterwork of premeditated theft. She asserted that 10 years of tending to the boundary between our properties had granted her ownership of the garden area where Sarah's ashes lay. The concocted evidence was remarkable in its boldness. Delilah presented receipts for landscaping services, photographs of herself tending the memorial area, and affidavits from neighbors affirming she had been the garden's real guardian while my grandmother's health failed and I neglected the land. But her most savage escalation was aimed at the sacredness of Sarah's resting place itself. A flood of reports to state regulators alleged that I had broken zoning laws with unlawful burial methods. Health department inspectors arrived, demanding evidence that Sarah's cremated remains had been legally interred, and threatened criminal charges for the desecration of human remains if I failed to provide the necessary paperwork. Standing in my kitchen with the crematorium's official certification. As officials photographed Sarah's memorial like a crime scene, I felt a resolve harden within me. This was not merely property theft. It was grave robbing disguised as official procedure. It was then that I made the decisive move that altered everything. Miguel Santos, the private investigator I engaged, possessed the predatory sense of a shark detecting blood. In under 72 hours, he had unraveled Delilah's business activities through a maze of shell companies and found a pattern that made my own harassment seem like a minor rehearsal. Marcus, you have to look at this, Miguel stated, laying out documents on my dining room table where Sarah and I once planned our weekend. Gardening, the papers smelled of fresh ink and impending justice. 15 properties on nearby streets. all acquired below market value by firms that lead back to Delilah's LLC network. She has been operating this scheme for more than a decade. The proof was damning. Coordinated assaults on elderly homeowners, methodical violations engineered to cause financial hardship, and a network that included a corrupt mortgage broker offering convenient buyouts when victims were unable to pay the mounting fines. Delilah hadn't just singled me out. She was managing a complex elder abuse operation worth millions, but the media attention generated by my situation changed everything. Sarah Morin, an investigative journalist with keen eyes and even sharper insights, recognized the larger story beyond a single widower's sorrow. Her article's headline cut directly to the issue: HOA President Harris's widower amidst grief. Memorial Garden becomes a battleground for property theft. When the piece was published, complete with photos of Sarah's memorial roses and excerpts from her final letters about the garden's significance, public opinion shifted dramatically. Social media was inundated with supportive comments, contributions for legal expenses came pouring in, and other victims of HOA abuse started to come forward with their own stories. My lawyer, Miguel Santos, a civil rights attorney with a fiery passion, launched a comprehensive legal counteroffensive. The restraining order against HOA harassment was merely the start. Civil rights complaints for targeting disabled individuals, grief being classified as a temporary disability under federal law, criminal charges for adverse possession fraud, and lawsuits for emotional distress due to memorial desecration formed a legal tidal wave. The awakening of the community was a beautiful spectacle. Neighbors who had been misled by Delilah's lies about my mental health discovered the truth about Sarah's cremated remains lovingly mixed with the memorial garden soil. Eleanor arranged prayer vigils. Religious leaders decried the assaults on a sacred burial ground. Even the arguments about property values fell apart as residents came to understand that historical designation would enhance, not diminish, their investments. Then came the scientific confirmation that elevated our local conflict to national prominence. Dr. Patricia Reeves from the State University showed up with soil sample kits and a magnifying glass, her excitement evident as the morning dew on Sarah's memorial flowers. "Marcus, this is incredible," she whispered, her hands shaking as she inspected the heritage rose bushes. 3 plant varieties here were believed to be extinct for over 50 years. Your garden is not just historically important. It's a genetic gold mine that could transform conservation initiatives. University researchers affirmed that the garden was eligible for the National Registry of Historic Places. Federal protection would override all local ordinances, rendering the HOA's authority null. The scientific significance generated a media frenzy and political backing that no amount of money could purchase. But the financial probe into Delilah revealed the true extent of the criminal scheme. Bank records obtained through criminal court subpoenas demonstrated developer funds being channeled directly into her personal accounts. Tax evasion was discovered through undisclosed LLC earnings. When IRS criminal investigators teamed up with federal prosecutors, Delilah's empire started to fissure like ice in a spring thaw. Knowledge nugget. Adverse possession requires open, notorious, and continuous use. Document everything to guard against property theft through fraudulent maintenance claims. The psychological warfare escalated to desperate new levels. Delilah hired actors to pose as mental health professionals for a staged intervention at my house, claiming that non-existent relatives had requested a welfare check. The gaslighting was intended to make me doubt my own sanity, but Sarah's preparedness and the community's support had built an unshakable defense. As I set up security cameras around Sarah's memorial, their red lights blinking like protective angels in the dim light, I knew we had arrived at a critical juncture. The predator was on the verge of becoming the prey. The ground-penetrating radar emitted a hum like a mechanical pulse as archaeologist Dr. Elena Rodriguez maneuvered the device across Sarah's memorial site. Seeking the ideal spot to extend the garden's foundation, what she discovered instead altered the course of everything. Not only for me, but for the annals of American history. "Marcus, halt all activity," Dr. Rodriguez murmured, her voice filled with the kind of exhilaration that defines careers. The radar display revealed distinct geometric shapes buried 3 feet beneath Sarah's favorite roses. We are not looking at garden soil. These are foundation remnants, stone and mortar work typical of 1880s construction. My heart pounded against my chest as the significance of her words washed over me like a tidal wave. What does that imply? Your memorial garden is situated directly over the original 1887 homestead of the town founders. This isn't merely historically important. It is archaeologically invaluable. Her hands trembled as she captured images of the radar data. Federal law provides automatic protection for sites like this. Every single action taken against you by the HOA is now instantly null and void. In a matter of hours, my property was converted into a restricted archaeological area. Federal agents secured the site with yellow tape that billowed like prayer flags around Sarah's memorial. County officials arrived with faltering apologies. State regulators rescinded every citation, every fine, and every threat that had plagued me for months. But the most significant discovery was found in Sarah's hidden letter, which was discovered tucked away in my grandmother's jewelry box like a time-release message from beyond the grave. My wife's graceful handwriting filled 3 pages with research that left me breathless. "My dearest Marcus," she had penned, "if you are reading this, I am gone and Delilah is making her move. I found something during my sleepless nights of researching our property." Grandmother's trust was not just about maintaining a garden. It was about preventing the loss of something irreplaceable. The preservation clause was grandmother's legal snare, crafted to catch anyone who would attempt to seize this sacred land for development. Sarah had been aware, somehow, even in the midst of her battle with cancer. My brilliant wife had perceived the deeper meaning of the land where her ashes would one day lie. The evidence of a criminal conspiracy came to light like buried treasure under federal scrutiny. Miguel's private investigation had identified 15 victim properties of the HOA, but federal investigators uncovered the true extent. A coordinated fraud operation involving mortgage brokers, probate lawyers, county assessors, and real estate developers. The RICO charges brought federal prison sentences that could ruin lives in the same way Delilah had ruined dreams. Dr. Rodriguez's scientific examination revealed Sarah's ultimate contribution to conservation history. DNA analysis of the memorial garden's soil indicated that my wife's cremated remains had mingled with rare indigenous seeds, establishing ideal preservation conditions for genetic material that was thought to be lost forever. Her memorial had unintentionally transformed into a living laboratory where love and science converged in an extraordinary way. The cremation ashes modified the soil's pH and mineral composition in a manner that preserved dormant seeds from the original homestead. Dr. Rodriguez clarified, her voice soft with awe. Sarah's remains did not just form a memorial. They created a biological time capsule that spans 140 years of botanical history. Archaeological protection bestowed upon my property complete immunity from HOA rules, county laws, and state meddling. The historical designation came with federal criminal sanctions for any interference. The security of my property's value, the trust fund, and Sarah's wishes were now upheld by the full authority of federal law. The media frenzy erupted nationwide within 24 hours. Environmental organizations hailed our garden as a symbol of conservation victory. A legal precedent was set, safeguarding memorial rights against development pressures. Sarah's love story had evolved into a federal case study in historical preservation. Knowledge nugget. Archaeological findings automatically invoke federal protection. Investigate your property's indigenous and colonial past before significant conflicts escalate. Standing in that protected area, inhaling the scent of ancient earth revealing centuries-old secrets, I understood that Sarah's intuition had led us to something far more profound than revenge. Love had literally preserved history, and history would now preserve love for future generations. The archaeologist's excited whisper still resonated in my thoughts. This changes everything. The conversion of my modest memorial garden into the focal point of a federal inquiry occurred with stunning swiftness. Within 72 hours of drive, Rodriguez's archaeological find, my property had the appearance of a small military base. But rather than being for conquest, we were constructing an empire of justice that would safeguard not only Sarah's memory but also innumerable future victims. Special Agent Jennifer Walsh from the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division established her command post in my living room, where Sarah and I once made plans for weekend projects. Now, federal prosecutors were spreading RICO case files over our dining table, assembling criminal charges that could bring down Delilah's entire fraudulent network. The irony was fitting. Sarah's home had become the center of operations for dismantling the woman who had attempted to take it. 15 defendants so far. Agent Walsh noted, her fingers tapping away on her laptop as the morning light streamed through Sarah's lace curtains. Property fraud, elder abuse, mail fraud, wire fraud, tax evasion, and now, interference with federal archaeological sites. We are anticipating sentences of up to 25 years. The archaeological team set up a permanent research facility behind Sarah's memorial roses, converting our backyard into a living laboratory. Dr. Elena Rodriguez worked in conjunction with the Environmental Protection Agency after it was discovered that 3 plant species in our garden were the last known genetic examples of varieties believed to be extinct. Graduate students began arriving daily to work on their dissertations on conservation genetics, while Sarah's ashes continued to foster scientific wonders. Your wife's remains established ideal preservation conditions? Dr. Patricia Reeves explained, her voice full of amazement as she studied soil samples through portable microscopes. The cremation ash modified the mineral composition in a way that kept dormant seeds viable for over a century. This is not merely a memorial garden. It is a genetic treasure chest worth millions to conservation science. The media approach turned our local issue into a national sensation. Documentary filmmaker David Morin started to cover the case for a feature film, chronicling the convergence of love, loss, and environmental justice. The Friends of Sarah's Garden expanded from a small group of neighbors to over 500 supporters globally, with crowdfunding efforts raising more than $150,000 for legal costs and garden preservation. Social media platforms erupted with the hashtag #SarasGarden, which garnered 2.3 million shares. Book publishers vied for the rights to our story with 6-figure offers. The Today Show, 60 Minutes, and National Geographic all sought exclusive interviews. Sarah's quiet love had transformed into a worldwide symbol of how one person's bravery could safeguard irreplaceable heritage. Religious figures from various denominations held prayer vigils at the memorial, sanctifying the ground where love had literally preserved history. Veterans organizations embraced our case as a model for honoring fallen comrades against institutional intimidation. The American Civil Liberties Union submitted an amicus brief in favor of memorial rights over private covenant restrictions. Miguel Santos put together a legal super team that was a veritable who's who of civil rights law. Federal prosecutors took on the RICO criminal charges, while civil rights lawyers addressed the discriminatory targeting allegations. Archaeological attorneys guaranteed adherence to historic preservation laws. Estate lawyers shielded the trust fund from additional disputes. The legal force was immense and was entirely financed by federal asset forfeitures from Delilah's confiscated accounts. The collection of evidence necessitated its own storage facility. Over 300 hours of security footage revealed patterns of systematic harassment. Audio recordings documented bribery offers and discriminatory remarks. Financial documents confirmed coordinated fraud across several states. Expert testimonies from archaeologists, botanists, psychologists, and grief counselors constructed an irrefutable case for justice. Political backing emerged with remarkable speed. The state legislature passed Sarah's Law, which protects memorial gardens from HOA harassment. The governor's office released public statements championing historic preservation against development interests. Congressional representatives denounced the patterns of elder abuse masquerading as property management. Federal agencies committed to stricter regulation of HOA governance throughout the country. The plan for expanding the memorial integrated archaeological findings into a comprehensive educational facility that honored both Sarah's memory and the site's historical importance. Projections for tourism revenue indicated $500,000 annually, which would benefit the entire community. The living memorial was set to become a paradigm for grief recovery and historic preservation, drawing visitors from all over the globe. University collaborations with international conservation organizations led to the establishment of seed banking initiatives utilizing our garden's genetic resources. Studies on climate change adaptation would use Sarah's memorial as a living laboratory to understand plant resilience. Scientific journals were already referencing our site as a successful conservation model, demonstrating that love could indeed rescue endangered species. Knowledge nuggets surface daily. Federal archaeological protection supersedes all local laws. Investigate your land's extensive history before major conflicts arise. RICO statutes are applicable to systematic property fraud. Document patterns across numerous victims. Crowdfunding can create a level playing field against affluent developers. Standing in Sarah's memorial garden at dusk, surrounded by federal protection signs and scientific instruments, I felt her presence more intensely than ever. The fragrance of her favorite roses mingled with the evening air, Carrying the promise of justice, archaeological grid markers encircled her memorial stone like a protective star pattern. The smooth bronze plaque we had installed bore a simple inscription: "Love preserves all things, Sarah and Marcus forever." The predator had roused a prey that was now shielded by federal law, scientific significance, and international backing. Delilah's empire was on the verge of collapsing under the weight of love that had been transformed into unyielding legal protection. Desperation drives criminals to recklessness, and Delilah Thornfield was about to demonstrate this principle with spectacular, self-inflicted fury. 3 days after federal protection was established around Sarah's memorial garden, she contracted Tommy the Torch Martinez, a notorious arsonist known for insurance fraud and a complete disregard for destroying sacred ground. The security cameras I had installed recorded every incriminating detail in high definition. At 2:47 a.m. on a moonless Thursday, Tommy navigated through my backyard with accelerant and matches. His every move was monitored by motion detectors that sent notifications directly to my phone and to the FBI surveillance teams who were already tracking Delilah's every move. The plan was devilishly thorough: to burn the memorial garden in a staged electrical fire that would wipe out archaeological evidence, Sarah's cremated remains, and invaluable genetic material in a single, devastating inferno. Insurance fraud would place the blame on my negligent maintenance while erasing every shred of federal protection and scientific worth. But federal agents had been tapping Delilah's phone calls since the RICO charges were initiated. They captured her directives to Tommy with absolute clarity. Make it seem accidental, but ensure that everything is destroyed: the memorial, the plants, the soil, everything that gives that bastard his legal shield. Agent Walsh's voice crackled on my phone at 2:45 a.m. "Marcus, remain indoors. We have the suspect in our sights. Federal marshals are in place." Through my bedroom window, I observed infrared laser sights moving across Tommy's chest as he doused Sarah's memorial roses with gasoline, their sweet scent about to be consumed by funeral flames. The arsonist never struck the match. Federal agents emerged from their hiding places, tackling him to the ground just a few feet from Sarah's memorial stone. The odor of spilled gasoline combined with lavender served as a sickening reminder of how close pure evil had come to annihilating everything sacred. Within hours, the attempted arson charges were upgraded to attempted murder when investigators found that Tommy had tampered with our home's gas line. An explosion would have killed me and destroyed the archaeological site. Federal prosecutors added charges of domestic terrorism upon realizing the plot was aimed at a federally protected historical location. But Delilah's criminal desperation plunged to new levels of psychological cruelty. Unable to physically destroy the memorial, she initiated a blackmail scheme intended to ruin my relationship with the community that had supported our cause. "I will reveal your illegal burial practices to every news outlet," she snarled in a recorded phone call that federal investigators later played for me. "I will sue the cemetery where Sarah's remains should have been interred. I will turn every religious organization against your perverted cremation choices and ensure you are remembered as a grave-robbing charlatan." Her threats exposed the extent of her obsession with completely erasing Sarah's memory. This was no longer just about property theft. It was about destroying every vestige of the love that had secured federal protection for irreplaceable history. The community documentation strategy one had put in place proved to be priceless. Every threat was recorded, time-stamped, and given to federal investigators, constructing an irrefutable case for punitive damages. My mental health assessment from Dr. Walsh confirmed my competence despite my grief, dismantling Delilah's narrative about my supposed instability. Property value manipulation was Delilah's next desperate move. She circulated rumors that archaeological limitations would hinder future property enhancements, thus devaluing everyone's investments. Anonymous leaflets began to appear, asserting that federal oversight would lead to property tax hikes and construction restrictions that would permanently ruin the neighborhood's character. The disinformation campaign backfired spectacularly when tourism forecasts indicated $500,000 in annual income from visitors attracted to our historically significant site. Property values were, in fact, rising as the archaeological designation drew positive media coverage and federal preservation funding for the whole district. Intimidation escalated into outright terrorism, and signed death threats were left at Sarah's memorial, written on paper that forensic analysis linked to Delilah's home printer. Phony legal documents claiming federal property confiscation were left on my doorstep, crafted to induce panic and force errors. When the harassment extended to my few remaining friends and distant relatives, federal investigators identified a pattern of witness intimidation that contravened multiple laws. Private. Investigators hired to dig up dirt on my past found nothing more incriminating than overdue library books and a college parking fine. However, their snooping was deemed criminal harassment under federal victim protection laws. Political pressure was Delilah's final desperate act. Her connections with developers lobbied city council members for emergency zoning exceptions to circumvent federal protection. Bribes were offered to archaeologists who were willing to downplay the site's importance. County officials were threatened with tax revenue losses if federal oversight persisted. Federal investigators infiltrated these corrupt meetings, recording bribery attempts that added public corruption charges to an already overwhelming criminal case. When Delilah offered $50,000 to a county assessor for falsifying archaeological reports, FBI cameras recorded every incriminating statement. The vandalism peaked on Sarah's birthday. I was awakened by the sound of breaking stone. Delilah had personally taken a sledgehammer to Sarah's memorial marker during the night, shouting obscenities about dead whores who don't deserve gardens. While federal surveillance captured her complete psychological unraveling, standing in that desecrated space, holding pieces of Sarah's shattered memorial stone as sirens wailed in the distance, I felt a profound sense of finality settle in my chest. The predator had at last shown her true colors completely, and justice was closing in on her with the full force of federal authority and community outrage behind every legal strike. The FBI sting operation played out like a chess match in which Delilah had already been defeated but refused to admit she was in checkmate. Special Agent Walsh laid out the plan in my kitchen, where Sarah's coffee mug still sat by the sink, as if she might come back for her morning coffee and garden planting session. We're going to use Agent Rodriguez. She will act as a corrupt city official who is willing to accidentally harm the archaeological site during a routine inspection. Walsh detailed, her voice tinged with the satisfaction of a predator about to execute the perfect ambush. Delilah's desperation has made her susceptible. She will incriminate herself in her attempt to destroy what she cannot possess. The undercover rendezvous was set for a neutral location, the city planning office, a place where legitimate permits were processed and illicit bribes were exchanged with similar regularity. Agent Rodriguez, posing as Planning Commissioner Maria Santos, was equipped with recording devices that would capture every word of Delilah's final criminal act. I can orchestrate an accidental water main rupture that will flood the archaeological grid. Agent Rodriguez proposed, her voice perfectly mimicking bureaucratic corruption. Soil will be disturbed, evidence will be contaminated, and federal protection will be compromised. $50,000 in cash will make the paperwork vanish. Delilah's reply was swift and damning. Make it $60,000 and guarantee the memorial area is completely obliterated. I want every particle of that dead bitch's ashes flushed into the storm drains where they belong. Federal prosecutors later informed me that those words had sealed her fate. Desecration of human remains combined with federal bribery carried mandatory minimum sentences that would ensure Delilah remained incarcerated until she was too old to threaten anyone's sacred ground. But it was Delilah's psychological collapse that provided the most compelling evidence, realizing that the federal investigation threatened not only her liberty but also her entire public persona as a community leader. She attempted what investigators later described as suicide by cop at Sarah's memorial garden. The confrontation occurred at dusk, with the golden light filtering through the protected oak tree as Delilah approached with a gasoline can and matches. Security cameras documented her complete mental breakdown as she shrieked accusations that revealed the extent of her obsession. "Marcus destroyed my life's work," she screamed, pouring accelerant around the federal protection signs while police surrounded the archaeological site. That garden was supposed to be mine. Sarah was meant to die alone and forgotten. I destroyed better people than her. Her confession, which was broadcast live by news helicopters circling above, gave prosecutors a psychological profile that explained 8 years of systematic elder abuse. This was not merely about property fraud. It was a pathological urge to obliterate the happiness of others and substitute it with her own distorted idea of success. Preparations for the community showdown began at once. Eleanor arranged a town hall meeting for the next evening, with an expected attendance of over 800 people. including federal officials, media representatives, and archaeological teams poised to reveal the site's full importance to world history. The presentation of evidence required federal collaboration with international scientific bodies. DNA analysis had shown that Sarah's memorial contained genetic material from indigenous peoples that dated back 10,000 years, making our garden not just archaeologically significant, but also anthropologically invaluable for understanding North American settlement history. The cremation ashes created ideal conditions for organic material that survived ice ages. Dr. Rodriguez explained, her excitement evident as she prepared her presentation. Sarah's memorial accidentally preserved human DNA, plant genetics, and soil microorganisms that form an unbroken chain of life spanning millennia. The scientific value was estimated to be over $10 million in research potential, elevating our local property conflict to an international conservation priority. A preliminary review by UNESCO indicated that a World Heritage Site designation was likely, which would make the federal protection permanent and inviolable. The legal checkmate was thorough and devastating. All challenges to property ownership were definitively settled by the federal archaeological protection. Access to the trust fund was secured with international scientific endorsement. Criminal conspiracy prosecutions guaranteed an end to future harassment from any source. Damages from civil lawsuits surpassed $1.2 million in punitive awards, financed by assets seized from Delilah's criminal network. Property values across the neighborhood rose by 60% due to the potential for historical tourism. The dissolution of the HOA and the establishment of federal oversight protected all residents from future systematic abuse. The media attention reached international levels. National Geographic committed to a feature documentary about our archaeological find. Social media support hit 3.8 million shares, with hashtag #LovePreservesHistory trending worldwide. International environmental groups pointed to our case as the ideal model for community-driven conservation through individual bravery. The political victory went far beyond local regulations. The federal Sarah's Law was passed by both houses of Congress, safeguarding memorial gardens nationwide from HOA harassment. Supreme Court amicus briefs were submitted in support of property rights against private covenant overreach. International human rights organizations used our case as a precedent for protecting burial sites from development interests. Knowledge nuggets were transformed into legislative text. Federal bribery charges come with a 15-year minimum sentence. Corruption is more costly than compliance. Archaeological sites are granted permanent protection. Irrespective of changes in property ownership, memorial gardens hold a special legal status under international human rights law. Research your state's bereavement protection laws. Standing in Sarah's memorial garden as federal agents made the final arrest of Delilah, I inhaled the evening air, which carried the scent of lavender and archaeological dust. The aroma of love transcending death to preserve history itself. The predator was at last in a cage, and justice was backed by federal power. The Riverside Community Center had never before accommodated 800 people for a town hall meeting. But then, our small town had never been the focal point of a federal archaeological find that would redefine American conservation law. I made my way through the crowded auditorium with FBI Special Agent Walsh at my left and Dr. Elena Rodriguez carrying archaeological evidence at my right, while camera crews from CNN, National Geographic, and 60 Minutes documented every moment. The atmosphere was charged, thick as the summer air. Eleanor was seated in the front row, her hands folded in a prayer-like gesture as she witnessed justice finally being served for our community. Veterans were in their dress uniforms to pay tribute to Sarah's memory. Religious leaders from 7 different faiths sat in reserved seats, prepared to sanctify the moment when federal law would grant permanent protection to this sacred ground. Then Delilah was brought in under federal custody. An orange jumpsuit had replaced her designer attire, and handcuffs shone under the television lights as U.S. Marshals led her to the defendant's table. Her perfectly styled hair was limp and gray, her manicured nails bitten down to raw, bleeding edges. The change was absolute. From predator to prey, from destroyer to destroyed, United States Attorney Margaret Morin stepped up to the podium with the solemnity of someone about to set a historical precedent. Her voice resonated through the silent hall with a federal authority that made local officials seem insignificant in their seats. Ladies and gentlemen, I am here to announce the successful prosecution of the largest organized property fraud conspiracy in the history of this state. she proclaimed, her words punctuated by camera flashes and the sound of frantic scribbling. 15 defendants are facing federal RICO charges for systematic elder abuse that spanned 8 years. Asset forfeitures have recovered over $50 million in fraudulent property transfers. Delilah Thornfield is facing 27 years in federal prison for conspiracy, arson, bribery, and interference with a federally protected archaeological site. A collective gasp from the audience was like the sound of wind rustling through Sarah's memorial oak tree. Justice had federal power, and that power was biting deep. Dr. Rodriguez then took the podium, her archaeological findings elevating our local conflict to the level of scientific history. The Hartwell Memorial Garden is the longest continuously occupied site in the North American archaeological record. 10,000 years of uninterrupted human cultivation. Indigenous peoples, colonial settlers, and modern families have all cared for this land. Sarah Hartwell's memorial preservation inadvertently protected genetic material that endured ice ages and colonial upheaval. The scientific victory was staggering in its implications. 3 plant species, thought to be extinct for 50 years, had been successfully grown from seeds preserved in the Memorial Garden soil. University research centers in 12 countries had requested genetic material. Studies on climate change adaptation would use our findings to create drought-resistant crops capable of feeding millions. Mrs. Hartwell's cremated remains created mineral conditions that preserved biological treasures of immeasurable value. Dr. Rodriguez went on, her voice thick with emotion. Love literally saved scientific history. This memorial garden now has permanent UNESCO World Heritage Site designation, making it inviolable for all time. The moment of tribute to the memorial silenced even the media crews. I walked to the podium holding Sarah's final letter, the one that had foretold Delilah's plot and planned our archaeological defense through garden preservation clauses that had seemed merely sentimental but were, in fact, strategically brilliant. My wife, Sarah, wrote these words while she was battling cancer. I began, my voice firm despite the tears that blurred her familiar script. She said, Marcus, when I am gone, they will try to destroy what we have built together, but love that is planted deep enough grows eternal roots that no one can uproot. Promise me you will care for our garden, because something precious is buried there that the world needs to remember. Sarah's intuition about the land's concealed importance had led us to a federal protection that went beyond personal retribution. The archaeological discovery confirmed that her instincts were scientifically sound. This land held irreplaceable treasures that individual courage had safeguarded against institutional greed. The community testimony part of the meeting revealed the full extent of the systematic abuse. 15 elderly victims shared their stories of harassment campaigns that had coerced them into selling their properties below market value. Frank Morrison, the veteran whose PTSD garden therapy had been ruined by citations, spoke through tears about the loss of his healing sanctuary to fabricated violations. Eleanor recounted how she had watched her neighbors vanish one by one as Delilah's fraudulent network consumed the street like a malignant growth. Then Delilah insisted on her right to speak, and the federal judge permitted her a final statement before sentencing. Her psychological unraveling offered the most damning evidence of all. Marcus ruined my life, she shrieked, her voice cracking with 8 years of obsessive animosity. That garden should have been mine. Sarah was supposed to die and be forgotten. I poisoned those roses because the dead don't deserve beauty. I would have burned all of it. The memorial, the ashes, every trace of the love that protected what I needed to steal. Federal marshals had to restrain her as she lunged toward the table of archaeological evidence, screaming obscenities about destroying sacred ground, all of which was captured by every news camera in the country. Her complete moral depravity was broadcast live to millions, guaranteeing that her notoriety would endure longer than her prison term. Justice was served with federal authority. A $1.2 million civil judgment, a 27-year prison sentence, a lifetime prohibition from property management, and a complete forfeiture of assets to repay the victims of her fraud. The sound of the gavel echoed like a clap of thunder, signaling the end of the storm. Love grows eternal? I whispered, touching Sarah's memorial plaque as cameras recorded the moment when justice finally embraced the sacred ground where my wife's ashes had nurtured miracles. 6 months after Delilah's federal sentencing, I stood in Sarah's memorial garden, observing children planting heritage seeds during our inaugural Love Grows Eternal festival. The scent of her cherished lavender blended with the smell of fresh earth and cotton candy from the vendor stalls, fostering an atmosphere where sorrow had given way to a celebration of life's perpetual renewal. Delilah was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison after entering a guilty plea to avoid a lengthier term. Her accomplices received sentences from 5 to 12 years. Their property fraud empire was entirely dismantled. The sale of forfeited assets raised $8.2 million for victim compensation, restoring the stolen wealth to elderly homeowners who had lost everything to systematic abuse. Her real estate license was permanently voided in all 50 states, ensuring she could never again use bureaucracy as a weapon against vulnerable individuals. The transformation of the Memorial Garden surpassed every hope Sarah and I had harbored in her final months. Its designation as a federal historic landmark drew over 50,000 visitors annually to our small town, generating $2.3 million in tourism income that supported new schools, senior centers, and veteran assistance programs. The Archaeological Museum showcased artifacts from 10,000 years of continuous cultivation, making our love story a part of humanity's most profound historical narrative. The scientific legacy blossomed beyond our most daring dreams. University research centers published 43 peer-reviewed articles using genetic material from the memorial soil, extinct plant species, successfully grown from seeds from Sarah's garden, now flourished in botanical conservatories around the globe. Studies on climate change adaptation led to the development of drought-resistant crops that could feed villages in Africa and withstand floods on Pacific islands. Sarah's ashes had literally contributed to saving lives on other continents. The healing of the community turned our neighborhood into a model of grassroots justice. Eleanor was unanimously elected as the new HOA president, where she enacted bylaws that safeguarded vulnerable residents and encouraged environmental preservation. Property values surged by 85% due to the historic designation and positive media attention. The annual Sarah's Garden Festival raised $300,000 for environmental education scholarships, guaranteeing her legacy would be carried on by future generations of young scientists. My own personal journey took everyone by surprise, myself included. Grief counseling enabled me to navigate my loss without diminishing the power of love to effect positive change. The role of Memorial Garden Director became my life's work, where I assist other widowed spouses in their healing through therapeutic gardening programs that cater to trauma survivors, cancer patients, and grieving families. Sarah's insight that love grows deeper roots had become a literal reality. A romance developed slowly and with deep respect with Dr. Patricia Reeves, who had spearheaded the botanical research that saved our garden. Our relationship blossomed like Sarah's memorial roses, diligently cared for, firmly rooted, honoring the past while welcoming new life. Sarah would have adored Patricia's gentle resilience and her scientific dedication to preserving life's precious variety. The federal Sarah's Law was passed by both houses of Congress with bipartisan backing, protecting memorial gardens from HOA harassment across the nation. 28 states passed their own bereavement protection laws. A Supreme Court precedent was set, establishing memorial rights as a fundamental human dignity safeguarded by federal civil rights law. Legal experts hailed it as the most significant property rights achievement in 50 years. The financial victory extended beyond personal needs and into the realm of legacy. The accessibility of the trust fund provided $65,000 annually for garden upkeep and educational initiatives. Tourism income established an endowment of over $5 million for environmental research. The appreciation of the property created generational wealth that will support conservation efforts long after I am gone. The settlement funds backed victim advocacy programs that assist elderly Americans in their fight against institutional abuse. The Sarah's Foundation has granted 127 environmental science scholarships to students from underprivileged backgrounds, realizing her dream of making education accessible based on merit rather than wealth. Garden therapy programs now serve over 800 veterans each year, offering PTSD treatment through a connection with living ecosystems. Research collaborations have benefited conservation projects on 6 continents. Love had evolved into a global environmental policy. The future outlook extends beyond individual justice to systemic reform. Archaeological work will persist for 15 years with international research teams. The National Geographic documentary received 3 Emmy Awards and prompted congressional hearings on HOA reform. Tourism forecasts indicate sustainable growth that will support our community for generations. The UNESCO World Heritage Site designation was unanimously confirmed, placing Sarah's Memorial Garden alongside Stonehenge and the pyramids as an irreplaceable part of human heritage. The citation stated, "This site exemplifies how individual love can preserve collective memory, demonstrating that personal courage, guided by a wisdom deeper than immediate comprehension, can create historical significance." Standing by Sarah's memorial fountain at sunset, watching Dr. Patricia teach children about seed preservation while veterans found tranquility among the heritage roses, I felt my wife's presence in every living thing she had helped to protect. The bronze plaque shone in the evening light. "Love grows eternal, Sarah and Marcus forever." Sarah taught me that love never dies, I told the documentary crew. It simply grows deeper roots and produces fruit that nourishes the world. Love had triumphed over all. Another day, another HOA conflict resolved. If this account made you shake your head in disbelief or pump your fist in triumph, hit that like button, post your own HOA stories below, and subscribe to catch every new conflict in the BBS.